There's a particular kind of person, someone who feels everything deeply. Every rejection cuts like a knife. Every disappointment is crushing. Every moment of joy is intense. But nobody knows this. To the world, they're calm, composed, unaffected. And that gap between what they feel and what they show, that gap is destroying them. These are the people who can be falling apart internally and still show up smiling. They can be heartbroken and crack a joke. They can be terrified and seem completely confident. They've mastered the art of the mask so completely that even they sometimes forget what's underneath. And here's what's psychologically significant. This isn't strength. It's survival. It's a coping mechanism that protected them once and is now slowly suffocating them. Because when you never show what you feel, you never get to process it. It just sits there, building up, layer after layer of unexpressed emotion accumulating inside until you're carrying around this enormous weight that nobody can see. And the lonelier part, even the people closest to you have no idea how much you're struggling. They see the calm exterior and assume you're fine. So they don't check in, they don't offer support, they don't even know you need it. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that comes with this. It's not physical. It's the exhaustion of constantly managing your own emotional presentation, of monitoring yourself, of catching yourself before you show too much, of rehearsing conversations so they come out the right way, of thinking 3 steps ahead about how your emotions might affect the people around you. It's the exhaustion of being at war with yourself. People who hide their emotions often become hyper-aware of everyone else's. They're reading the room constantly. They're picking up on micro-expressions, tone shifts, the way someone's shoulders tense. They know when someone's upset before that person has even realized it themselves. And they respond, they adjust. They make themselves smaller or bigger, or quieter or louder, depending on what the room needs. But who adjusts for them? Who reads their emotional state? Nobody, because they've convinced everyone they don't have one. This creates a really specific kind of loneliness. It's the loneliness of being known by everyone and understood by no one. It's the loneliness of being the person people come to with their problems, the person everyone trusts, the person who seems to have it all figured out, while you're secretly falling apart, and you can't tell anyone because what would you even say? Hey, I'm actually struggling after years of projecting complete stability. It would feel like a betrayal of the image you've constructed. It would feel like admitting you're not who everyone thinks you are. And here's what's really insidious about this pattern. The longer you hide your emotions, the harder it becomes to access them at all. Your body learns that feeling things isn't safe, so it shuts down, it numbs. You start to dissociate from your own emotional reality. You can describe what happened. Someone broke up with you. You lost a job. Someone hurt you. But you can't feel it. It's like you're watching your own life from behind glass. You're present, but not present. You're there, but you're not really there. People like this often report feeling empty, not sad, not anxious, just empty. A kind of flatness where nothing touches them anymore. And that's terrifying because at least sadness means you're still feeling something. Emptiness is the absence of feeling. It's the cost of protecting yourself for too long. And by the time they realize what's happening, the disconnection is so deep that getting back to feeling anything seems impossible. The coping mechanism of hiding emotions usually shows up in specific ways. Some people become obsessively rational. They logic their way through everything. Emotions are messy and unpredictable, so they eliminate them by thinking about things exclusively from an intellectual standpoint. Others become extremely controlled. They have routines, schedules, systems. Control is a way of managing the chaos of feelings they refuse to acknowledge. Some people throw themselves into work or projects or helping others, staying busy as a way of outrunning the emotions chasing them. And there are people who dissociate so completely that they genuinely don't know what they're feeling. They can tell you what happened, but not what it felt like. They can describe the facts, but not the experience. They've learned to separate the experience from the emotion so completely that the two don't connect anymore. They're like someone watching a movie about their own life. Here's the thing about emotions that people who hide them don't understand. Until it's too late, they don't actually disappear. Suppressed emotions don't vanish. They accumulate. They transform. They come out sideways. They show up as physical illness, chronic pain, digestive issues, tension headaches, insomnia. They show up as rage that explodes over small things. A criticism that should roll off becomes a nuclear explosion. Someone cancels plans and suddenly you're furious in a way that seems disproportionate. That's the accumulated weight of all the emotions you've never expressed finally breaking through. Or they show up as depression, a kind of heaviness and numbness that seems to have no source. You suppressed your sadness for so long that your brain starts creating its own depression as a way of processing all that unexpressed pain. You end up in the state where you feel sad but you don't know why. You're depressed, but there's no triggering event. It's just the cost of never letting yourself feel anything. The thing about emotions is that they're information. They're your nervous system trying to tell you something. Anger tells you that a boundary has been crossed. Sadness tells you that something matters to you. Fear tells you that there's a threat. Anxiety tells you that you need to pay attention. When you suppress all of that, you lose the information. You lose the guidance system that's supposed to help you navigate life. You become numb to yourself. People who hide their emotions often struggle in relationships because they can't be real in them. They can be physically present, but emotionally absent. Their partners feel the distance even if they can't name it. There's a wall, and the longer the wall stays up, the more the partner feels rejected. They feel like they don't matter enough for this person to let them in. They feel like they're in a relationship with someone who isn't really there. And eventually they leave, and the person who hides their emotions feels confirmed in their belief that people will leave them if they know the real truth. Except the real truth is that people leave because they were never let in. Now, this pattern doesn't emerge randomly. It comes from something. It comes from an environment where emotions weren't safe, where crying was weakness, where anger was unacceptable, where sadness was something you had to get over quickly, where the appropriate response to pain was to shut up and move on. Some people grew up in families where emotions were mocked, where crying got you laughed at, where feelings were seen as dramatic or self-indulgent. So they learned, don't feel, or at least don't show that you feel. Others grew up with a parent who was emotionally unstable, a parent whose emotions were terrifying, whose rage was unpredictable, whose sadness was overwhelming, and the child learned that emotions are dangerous, that feelings are things that destroy people, that the safe thing to do is to stay controlled, to stay calm, to not let anything show, because if you don't show it, you can't hurt anyone with it. Some people grew up in environments where one person's emotions dominated everything: a parent's depression, a parent's anxiety, a parent's rage. And the child learned to become invisible emotionally, to never have needs, to prioritize managing the emotional state of the adults around them. So they pushed their own feelings down and became hyper-focused on everyone else's. And some grew up in families where there was no room for certain emotions. Sadness wasn't allowed because the family needed you to be the strong one. Anger wasn't allowed because it was disrespectful. Fear wasn't allowed because it was weakness. Joy wasn't allowed because it seemed ungrateful. So you learn to feel only the acceptable emotions, and you train yourself not to feel the rest. The real damage happens because these lessons become so integrated that you don't even see them as lessons anymore. You think this is just who you are. You think you're naturally calm. You think you're naturally composed. You don't realize you're actually just really skilled at hiding. You don't realize that the calmness isn't genuine. It's a performance that's become so automatic that you can't distinguish it from reality anymore. And the longer you maintain it, the more isolated you become. Because real connection requires vulnerability. It requires letting someone see your actual emotional state. It requires admitting that you're struggling, that you're scared, that you don't have it all figured out. And people who hide their emotions can't do that, so they end up with relationships that feel shallow, interactions that feel surface level, a life that feels like it's happening to someone else. What's heartbreaking is that these people often have incredibly deep emotional lives. They feel things so intensely that it's terrifying. They're probably the most emotionally intelligent people you know because they've been forced to develop such acute awareness of emotions. Everyone else is anyway. They could be incredible artists, writers, therapists, counselors. Their emotional depth could be a gift, but instead, they've turned it inward, and it's become a prison. The path forward requires something really difficult, letting the emotions out. Not all at once. That would be too much. But slowly, carefully, starting to tell someone what you actually feel, starting to cry if you need to, starting to admit when you're struggling, starting to risk being seen as something other than the stable, composed person everyone thinks you are. And that's terrifying because it feels like losing your identity. It feels like becoming someone you don't recognize. But here's what happens when you finally start to let feelings through. You start to feel alive again. The emptiness starts to fill. The numbness starts to lift. The heaviness starts to ease. You start to remember what it feels like to actually be present in your own life. And it's both the most painful and the most beautiful thing, because you're feeling all the pain you've been suppressing, but you're also feeling joy again. You're feeling connection. You're feeling real. If this resonates, if you're recognizing yourself as someone who feels deeply but shows nothing, if you're starting to see the cost of that performance, that awareness is everything. You don't have to change overnight. You don't have to suddenly become someone who cries on command or wears their emotions on their sleeve. But you can start small. You can tell one person one true thing about how you're actually feeling. You can let yourself cry once without judging yourself for it. You can admit you're struggling without immediately reassuring everyone that you're fine. The people who love you, the real ones, they want to know the real you. They're not going to leave because you're struggling. They're going to leave because you never let them see you. They're going to leave because the distance got too far. They're going to leave because they can feel that you're not really there. But if you let them in, if you show them who you actually are, if you let them see your emotions, something shifts. The relationship becomes real, the connection becomes real, understanding these patterns, seeing how we protect ourselves sometimes to our own detriment. That's what we're exploring here at The Forgotten Self. We're looking at the ways we've learned to hide, the masks we've constructed, the cost of performing our entire lives. If this helped you see something about yourself, if it opens something you've been keeping closed, subscribe, because we're building a community where it's safe to feel, where vulnerability is seen as the strength it actually is, where being real is more important than being fine. Until next time, let yourself feel something, even if it scares you, especially if it scares you.